Yeah. I mean, this isn't just something that you get over, right? It's not over just because they came in and did this rape kit. It's not over if they happen to get justice and their rapist goes to prison. Only about 5 out of every 1,000 cases a rapist goes to prison. Only 5, right?
Oh, I gotta go. I've been working, told them please don't hit my phone. I'm in my zone, bruh, just leave me alone. Was on the road, but I swear I'm coming home. Now the drinks on me, I think we need a toast. See, I did it for me. Now my old friends calling, told them nothing's for free. Told me time is money, dog, swear I paid all my fees. I was starving for this game, now my family can eat.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Another Cup of Nurses episode with your hosts, Peter and Matt here. Thank you everyone for tuning in and taking the time for listening. If you guys find value in this podcast or previous podcasts, please give us a like, comment, or subscribe. It grows us and it keeps on motivating us to keep on producing this high quality content. You can now rate the show on Spotify. So if you have the Spotify app, please go there and smash the star rating that you think we deserve. It's going to ultimately give us better search engine optimization for the algorithms. And we have been seeing an improvement in organic searches and downloads, so we appreciate that. If you guys want to find any show notes or anything related to announcements and what's happening with the Cup of Nurses, check out cupofnurses.com. We have blog posts there for nursing students, and we are growing as we speak. For anything related to consciousness and expanding yourself and self-improvement and positivity, check out We Are Frontline Warriors. And we also have merch stores for both opportunities for Cup of Nurses and We Are Frontline Warriors. We're wearing some Frontline Warriors merch right now as we speak. Also, our YouTube is popping. We're trying to get 5,000 subs maybe this year, so let's go. Our nursing debriefments are on there where we talk about how our shift has been going after like a 3 in a row. So a ton of information out there, especially for new nurses that want to know what it's like to work in a hospital. And of course, we're working on this great app that's going to innovate and revolutionize healthcare. We are working diligently on it every single day, actually. And we're hoping to be launching really, really soon, Q1 of 2022. So stay tuned for updates and all that there. And yeah, let the show begin. How you doing, Pete?
I'm doing great. Another amazing guest today. We have Leah Helmbrecht. Leah Helmbrecht, she is a SANE nurse, which means a sexual nurse examiner. And we talk about forensic nursing, things that she does in a hospital, and just basically what SANE nursing is all about and some potential future changes in the system. Hey, Leah. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being here. Can you give us a little bit of background about yourself, what kind of nursing you do and currently or have done or currently do?
Sure. Thank you for having me. In the past, I have been an operating room nurse. I traveled as an OR nurse for 7.5 years. And then recently I've gone permanent. I did remote work as a tele-triage nurse. Before finding out about SANE nursing, sexual assault nurse examiner, which is what I'm doing right now. And then I'm also working as an admissions discharge nurse.
Okay. And how was your experience as an operating room? I know it's completely different from bedside, and it's probably completely different pace than what Peter and I do.
Oh, absolutely. It's so different. So actually my first nursing job right out of nursing school was on the floor, like a med-surg floor. And it was so crazy, right? Like 6 to 8 patients for a nurse and very minimal help. So a friend of mine said, you should come to the operating room 1 patient at a time and they're asleep and no family members, right? So I went there and I absolutely loved it. It's different in the fact of you're more just knowing what the surgeon wants, having to work quickly in emergencies, and deciding you have multiple people asking you for things, right? Anesthesia needs you to get the blood to give back to this patient, but then the surgeon needs you to grab sutures to stop the bleeding. So which do you do first, right? So I really enjoyed it. I was lucky enough that I could travel with it for so long, and it was a great specialty to travel in because there were always OR nurses needed.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
when you did your traveling OR, did you have to do 312s as well? Was it like completely different where you had to sign a contract for being on a call a couple days a week, or how does that work?
Yeah, it really depends on the hospital. So some hospitals don't want to pay you call pay, right, as a traveler. So a lot of hospitals I didn't have to take call at all. And others I maybe did one call shift a week. I mainly did day shift, and it was either 312s or 410s. I never went for the ones that were 5/8s because I like my sanity and my days off. So but I mean, there's literally all different shifts, right? All different start times. We in the OR are lucky enough that we actually most of the time got breaks, right? We had break nurses come in to let us out of the OR because you can't just leave in the middle of surgery. Yeah, I mean, it was great. I think, if you like more of the technical aspect of nursing, like getting to see the inside of the human anatomy and how, how these surgeons are literally putting people back together and being a part of that, I think it's a great career, great specialty to go into.
Yeah. And what made you switch over from being an OR nurse to a sexual assault nurse examiner? Was there like one particular case, or this is just something you heard online and started to explore more? How did you get into that?
It was really interesting. I had never heard of a SANE, a sexual assault nurse examiner before. And I was a traveler for 7.5 years. I decided I wanted to try something different outside of the OR, and even outside of nursing altogether. So I actually became a travel nurse recruiter. Unfortunately, that was at the beginning of the pandemic. So that was when the ORs shut down and all of those jobs disappeared. I don't know how long you guys have been traveling when you picked up, but basically, unless you were an ICU nurse, it was a huge struggle, right? I think they went from 14,000 jobs down to 300. So as a recruiter who has to build their own desk, it was a huge challenge. But I found out about SANE nursing from one of my travelers that I had signed. She was previously an ER nurse and had done SANE, was SANE certified. So when she sent me her resume, I was like, SANE? What does that mean? And I kind of just started Googling it and looking into it. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And so, I was kind of in that point in my recruiter career where it was really, really hard. And most of the days it was giving travelers really bad news, like, hey, they're canceling your contracts. Hey, the hospital's dropping your pay. And I hated it. I hated it so much. So I was worried that if I stayed outside of nursing for too long, that I wouldn't be able to get back into it if the recruiter job didn't work out. Plus, we're in a pandemic. I have my RN license, and I felt like I needed to contribute back to my community in that way, right? So I decided to go back to nursing, and I got a job as a tele-triage nurse, working remote from home. And just anyone in the Denver area can call in for advice. And I actually had my first sexual assault patient call in, and she's, couldn't remember what happened, wasn't sure what she should do or where she should go. And I pulled up our sexual assault guideline and ended up sending her into the emergency room. And after that, I kind of looked more into it, found out that University of Colorado Hospital here has a free SANE program. So I can actually kind of do the online modules, see if it's actually something that I'm interested in. And it's at no cost to me. And the more I did it, the more interested I became in it. and I completed the whole program, and then happened to see a SANE job pop up at my hospital that I was at. So I feel like it kind of just all just rolled together, just like laid out perfectly for me. And that's kind of how I ended up in this position, how I found out about it. And yeah, it's great. I really enjoy it.
So being a SANE nurse, what are like your kind of day-to-day activities? Because like I've looked a little bit into forensic nursing, but I didn't do like too much exploring because majority of people are female victims. So usually, I know my clinical experience, we did have a sexual assault victim come in and she was female, and their rule was if it's a female getting sexually assaulted, then it's gonna be a female nurse doing the examination. That's how it was back in Joliet. So like kind of, can you describe what you kind of do as a SANE nurse?
Yeah. And, I think it just depends on where you are, right? We have some great male SANE nurses. And so with that, sometimes even when it's a female that was assaulted, which really anybody can be assaulted, right? Doesn't matter your gender or race or socioeconomic class or age, anybody can. But sometimes when it's a female that was just sexually assaulted by a male, it's actually kind of nice to have a male SANE nurse to show them, give them a positive male experience, right? To say, hey, I'm a man and I am here to help you and I believe you, right? Because I think in society, that's like such a huge issue where most of these patients aren't believed, right? So as a SANE nurse, what I do is I basically give them go over their options, right? So each state has different reporting options. Most states have the full law enforcement, full law enforcement investigation option where we call the police, they come down, get a statement, do a full investigation. The rape kit is sent off to the lab for analysis. And they go through all of the legal processes. Most states also have an anonymous option. And this is where the police don't know the patient's name at all. Everything's written anonymously on the outside. We take their statement, we do the whole kit, and then the kit goes to the crime lab and it sits on a shelf. And they have a certain amount of time to where they can decide to upgrade that reporting status. So here in Colorado, it's 2 years. So it'll sit on the shelf for 2 years before the evidence is ultimately destroyed. And it just kind of gives that person time to decide, like, is this really something that they want to go through, right? Because we live in a society of victim blaming, shaming, and not believing. And it's up to them to have to prove that this happened to them, right? So it's not an easy decision to make to actually come forward. And a lot of people don't just come forward and say, yes, I want to file a police report, as a lot of, a society suspects that they do. In Colorado, we have a medical reporting option that's where we can the police know their name, but there's no investigation done. But we can collect the evidence and actually run the evidence to see if anything comes back, right? So I mean, it's great to have different options, and I can go through why some people would want to do those options, but those are kind of what I go through, some of the things that I explain to these patients. So once we decide which reporting option they want to do, then we go back to my SANE room, where we can have privacy. They tell me everything that happened in their own words, and I'm literally typing word for word what they're saying, right? From there, whatever they tell me is going to kind of drive my assessment on them. So what I'm looking for, so when the police are asking, they're like, where did this happen? Who was it? Things like that. I'm more looking for what happened during the assault. Did they bite you here? Did they lick you here? I'm trying to figure out, where can I find DNA? You only need 8 to 10 skin cells to get a DNA match. So, if they say they grabbed my leg and squeezed it really hard, there might be some DNA there. I'm going to swab there, right? If there was penetration, right, of any kind, I'm going to do an external vaginal exam and swab. And then I'm also going to do internal. And this is all depending on what the patient wants, right? If they don't want an internal exam, then we don't have to. The main purpose of this is to give these victims back control that was taken away from them during the assault, right? So I'm just there to help them in any way that I can give them back that control. So after that, I kind of do like a head to toe. If I see any bruises, abrasions that weren't there before, then I will take a photo of it for the records. And then I document everything, right? So the photos that I take are very specific. We have the ruler. It's just like in the movies where you see those pictures with the ruler up to the bruise. And so when I'm documenting, on the right lateral side of the leg, noted a circular bruise, purplish blue in color, tender to touch, right? So it's very specific, and that's so that if those photos end up going missing and I have to testify on something in court, I have all of my notes that are very, very specific. After that, we definitely want to give them post-trauma care. So that's getting them in touch with the victims advocacy groups, that's, helping them, making sure if, they want to talk to somebody, that those victim advocacy groups are really great. They have therapists, they can help them with the legal part of it. Also giving them information on how to do restraining orders if they need to, just a multitude of things like that. And then we want to make sure medically that we are covering them, right? So that's giving them Plan B, right? So we give a medication called Ella, which is a type of Plan B pill. Ella is a little bit better in the fact that you can give it up to 120 hours after the assault, and it's just as good as day one, right? We give STD prophylactic medications that cover trichomonas, gonorrhea, and chlamydia. Obviously, there are a lot more STDs out there than just those. So we do give them the option to follow up with our STD clinic in 2 weeks. And then also NPEP, which is for HIV prevention, if they want to do that. That's a whole 28-day medication that they will have to complete. But all of those medications are covered under the Violence Against Women's Act and free of charge for those who are going through this exam.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the beginning that sometimes it's better to have like a male examiner, because if it's like a female, she's usually getting raped by a male. Then you said it kind of starts to like build that trust back into the other sex. Do you know how long like these psychological effects could last from like rape? I know it could last like years to like permanent, but is there like an average that you've seen?
Lifetime, right? It's lifetime. It's everybody's different, right? But yeah. I mean, this isn't just something that you get over, right? It's not over just because they came in and did this rape kit. It's not over if they happen to get justice and their rapist goes to prison. Only about 5 out of every 1,000 cases a rapist goes to prison. Only 5, right?
I was actually going to ask about the statistic, and that's like the thing that makes it worse for the victim is when they hear this statistic. It's like, what's the point of going through all this when their justice might not be served?
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have those reporting options, right? To give them time to think about, is this something I want to really do? You think about all these women who come forward or people who come forward years down the line, right? We always see that in the news. Well, why did they take so long to come forward? You don't know somebody's process, right? You don't know what finally motivates someone to say, I'm strong enough to come forward and actually bring this to light. Because when they do, especially when it's someone famous, right, they're constantly going to be scrutinized and not believed, because most often people are going to love that famous person, right? That's why they're famous. People love them. And so when somebody comes forward, they're basically trashed. They get hate mail. They get, just it's awful, And so when somebody says like, oh, man, even when someone comes forward and then says, okay, never mind, I lied. It's fine, most often they weren't lying. They're just tired of getting all of this hate, right? It wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it. So, and that just goes back to how our society is basically bred, never believing the victim and always, giving the perpetrator the benefit of the doubt. So,
Yeah, it's crazy how like with all these celebrities, like we see them as like these grandiose people, almost like superheroes, not really capable of doing like these negative things. And then when you have like a sexual assault victim come out, like you hear them talk about, hey, the public is giving me so much scrutiny. Like, why does nobody believe me? Like you hear that all the time, and it's shame that happens, and like it's the whole victim blaming thing what it comes down to be. So is there like some common misconceptions that people have about like sexual assault victims?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the main misconceptions just in general with sexual assault, right, is that just because someone was sexually assaulted doesn't mean that they don't want to have consensual sex, right? And so a lot of the times we ask, when was your last consensual sex? And some people don't come in right away, right? And so if they say like, oh, well, I had sex with my boyfriend, 2 days after, then, oh, well, you must be lying. How could you possibly want to have sex? If you just went through this traumatic event, right? Another misconception is people who change their story, right, are also lying. But we know with the neurobiology of trauma that a lot of the memories in the brain can be jumbled. Best memory recall is going to be 3 full sleep cycles after an assault. So even police, when they're in a shootout, they get 3 days before they have to go and make their initial statement, right? So, but we expect these patients who just went through a huge trauma, who just came in, to say like, okay, tell me what happened. And you have to remember every single thing that just happened in order. And if you change anything out of order, you must be lying, right? There's, a huge misconception that you can come in and we can tell you if you were sexually assaulted. Specifically, the vagina was made to go through a lot of trauma, right? It goes through childbirth. A lot of times we don't see trauma. That doesn't mean that the assault didn't happen. Just because we don't see trauma does not mean that what they're saying happened didn't happen. A lot of times, sorry, my dog is like scratching at the door. Another thing is, oh, well, I can go and they can do a drug screen and tell me if I was drugged or not. The number one drug used in sexual assault is alcohol, right? get someone so blacked out drunk that they can't remember what happened. Another thing is a lot of these drugs that are used in sexual assault, they either end up leaving the system before anyone ever makes it to the emergency room, or they're just drugs that we don't typically test for in the emergency room. Like there's no way for us to test for them. And so I always have to tell them, I'll send it off to the crime lab for further analysis, but I do have to tell them, just because it, if it comes back clear, I have to tell you, like, it's not that we don't believe you that you were drugged, or it doesn't mean that you weren't drugged. It's like, we just don't have the capabilities of testing for everything. So, just some misconceptions. I watched this one movie recently, and it was about this girl that was sexually assaulted, and her boyfriend's trying to take her all around to all these hospitals, and she has to pee really bad. And he's like, no, you have to wait, and so she ends up peeing in a cup and carrying this cup around with her. And in the past, they've had people do that, but please don't do that anymore. We will just discard it, because a defense lawyer later on will just say, well, we don't know whose urine that was. Nobody witnessed them doing that, right? So you don't have to bring your urine to the emergency room. And probably one of the biggest things too is that we want to put these patients' comfort before anything else, right? Let them eat, let them drink. Just because they take a shower does not mean we can't try to get evidence collection on them, right? DNA is extremely resilient. So it's okay if you've taken a shower. You can still come in. Different hospitals have different timeframes of when they can collect evidence. For my hospital, for those who are post-pubescent, considered adults, we will do that up to 7 days post-assault. And in 7 days, you've been peeing, you've been eating, you've been brushing your teeth and drinking and taking showers, and it's fine. We can still try to get some DNA. So other hospitals, it's 5 days. It just all goes back to funding. So I mean, so many misconceptions, to debunk. And I think just overall, we as a society just need to start taking that first step in believing these victims, right? We need to start doing that. And then because we believe them, unfortunately, doesn't mean that they're going to get justice in our system. But believing someone can make all the difference in their healing process.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough situation to be in, and the system that we have, isn't always set up best for the victims. So since you've been in the system for a little bit, what's something that you would like to see change, or potentially a change in the future, or do you think if it changed, it would improve the outcomes or the care?
I think that we need to do more education with our law enforcement officers. And I recently had to go down and sit and talk with some police officers, with a lieutenant, and even then, just some of the things that were said, of just how to treat these patients and how to talk to them, and them knowing and understanding the neurobiology of trauma and why patients are acting the way they do, right? Because that's their job when they do their training. It's mostly like, okay, here are the certain questions that you have to ask, right? But as law enforcement, they are the first people that these victims come in contact with, right? And it'll make all the difference on whether they decide to go forward with their exam, or if they even decide to come forward in the future, because we do know that a person who was victimized, that was sexually assaulted, has a high risk of being sexually assaulted again. And if their experience the first time was not good, then they're not going to come forward again, right? I'd like to see a huge change in our judicial system where, you see these, oh, well, it was their first offense. They're on medication to lower their libido, or we're just going to let them off with probation, things like that, because it's their first offense, right? It has nothing to do, sexual assault has nothing to do with sex. Domestic violence, like intimate partner violence, has nothing to do with anger management. It has to do with power and control, right? So when you give somebody a medication to lower their libido, it doesn't make any difference. They will find a way to go and sodomize somebody, to get an object, to hold that person down. It does not mean that that's going to keep them from assaulting somebody again. Anger management, these people have no problems with anger management, because a lot of times when these domestic violence charges come up, a lot of people in their lives are like, what? They're the nicest people. They're so kind. I can't even believe it. I would not even believe it, because it's not about anger management. They don't lash out in public. It's about power and control over that specific person in their life, right? So I think our judicial system, the way that we handle these perpetrators, needs to change. And then again, back to law enforcement, just treating the patients differently and going in believing the patients, right? So yeah,
that's crazy how many loopholes the system has when it tries to seek justice. And just like you mentioned, that you could have a loophole by taking a pill to lower your sex drive, because that's the reason why you're acting out this way. And and if you look at the hardcore facts, no one in a normal society is going to be trying to domestically create violence among somebody or rape somebody just because of a high sex drive. Those are not normal thoughts nor behavior.
Right. It's crazy how how the rapist has this, because I read a book about this before, or the author maybe, it was a long time. I think it was back when I was in college or something. But it was explaining that what happens to the victim, and how rapist has this internal lack of control, and the only way they see a solution is to kind of control some aspect about someone's life, and that's why they rape the person or they abuse a person, because that's showing them that they have control over something, which is really fucked up if you think about it, because that's the way they individualize them having control, is having sexual control over somebody or abusing somebody. And it's literally it's like a mental disease. You could say that a anti-libido pill isn't going to fix. And it's just crazy to realize that people go through this, and like you said before, that the victim, it usually happens again, which is wild. Because if only 5 cases out of 1,000 only really get solved, then this person could really legit be abused their whole life. And that's and then imagine the suicide that gets attributed to it, because if you got raped 3 or 4 times and you're still in the system and none's ever getting solved, and it's, for example, the same person raping you over and over again, but nobody believes you, or there's not enough evidence, or the person's such a good person and you can't get your problem solved, that person, even when he's not raping you, he still has control over you, because you have no way of getting the truth out.
Yeah.
And then people commit suicide because of these things, and it's very sad and very unfortunate that we live in a society like this. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we need to stop telling these people of intimate partner violence, like, oh, if the assault is so bad, if it's so bad, why don't you just leave? Right? It's not that easy, right? So they're at high risk for being murdered if they stay, and they're at even higher risk of being murdered if they leave. Like, your chances of being murdered are the highest when you decide to leave, and even up to a year. And that's not even just the victim, right, of being at risk for being murdered, but their family and friends, and children, right? if I can't have you, nobody can, right? Let's say they do get away, they go and change their name, change everything. That assailant is going to go harass their family and their friends until they find out where you are, right? So it's not that easy. And then if you look at the timeline of abuse, right? So it never starts off as abuse, right? It never starts off as abuse. It starts off as love bombing, right? Oh my gosh, he's amazing. He's giving me all of these things. And I say he just because that's statistically most common, is the abuser is a male and the victim is a female, but it can also happen both ways, right? In all instances. So it starts off as love bombing. You get somebody to have this emotional attachment to you, right? And then down the line, it starts to be, alienation against their family and friends. You know, I don't think they really like me. If you really cared about me, you'll stop talking to them and hanging out with them, right? So now they have no support system, right? Then it turns into, you don't need to work. I can afford to work for both, afford to take care of both of us. You don't need to work. So now they don't have any support system and they don't have any money, any financial means of getting away. Then they'll either get them a pet or impregnate them, have a child with them. If you try to leave, I'm going to take your pet. If you try to leave, I'm going to take the kids. You're never going to see them, right? So now they have no support system, no money, and they're going to have the one thing that they do that they love taken away from them or hurt, right? If you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to hurt the kids. I'm going to hurt the dog, right? And then it just starts escalating even further, right? To the point where we know that once it gets to the point of the intimate partner violence strangulation, then that is the last precursor to homicide. So it just will continue to escalate and escalate and escalate until murder. So whenever I see my patients who have been assaulted, it really has to be their decision to leave, right? I'm never going to pressure them to leave because they could be at risk for being murdered if they stay, but I could also be telling them to leave and they could still be at risk for being murdered. It has to be their decision, and I'm just there to give them the resources that they need to leave when they're ready. But again, as society, we need to stop making it like this huge assumption that it's so easy to just up and leave an abusive situation.
And ultimately you're there, which is cool as a nurse because you're the advocate, and that's what we do best is we advocate for our patients no matter the circumstances. And I also want to mention that you were talking about the neurobiology trauma of everything. So everything in full circle, the abusers doing all this physical violence to you, emotional, and then also you have your own neurobiology that's not on your side anymore because it was, trauma induced, that's creating chemicals, that's just putting you in your own prison. And how does that all kind of like go into the rape-induced paralysis? Like, what is the chemical breakup there?
So there's certain parts of your brain that get triggered during a trauma, right? And this could be for any trauma. It doesn't have to be a sexual assault or being physically assaulted, right? You could be in a car accident and these parts of your brain will light up. So when a trauma occurs, so you've got your hypothalamus and your pituitary glands, right? So hypothalamus, pituitary glands, and adrenal glands make up your HPA axis. Okay, and so when a trauma occurs, your hypothalamus will activate your pituitary gland, which will stimulate your adrenal glands to release a series of hormones. Those hormones are going to be like a corticosteroids, like cortisol, oxytocin, and just like a natural opioid in your body, right? And each person is going to have a different amount of those hormones released. That's going to determine that person's affect, right? So there's no right or wrong way for somebody to be acting after an assault. I've seen some patients that literally they have to pace back and forth because they've got those steroids that are being released that's causing them that fight or flight, right? And they're just pacing back and forth. Their thoughts are everywhere. They're talking a mile a minute. I have patients that are like, I feel fine. It's kind of weird. Like, I don't know, like, should I feel differently? Like it doesn't hurt or anything down there. So I don't really know what happened. And that's that, natural, opioid that's released, right? The natural morphine in your body. You don't feel pain. You're kind of numbed. The oxytocin. I feel okay. Sometimes I'm actually just like laughing with the patient, right? We're just chit-chatting and laughing about other things, right? You don't always have to see these patients as being like just absolutely crying and overwhelmed with the situation, right? You also have patients who come in 3 days, whatever, 2-3 days after the assault, and it's like, what were you doing this whole time? Because typically, someone would think like, well, if you were assaulted, wouldn't you want to get help right away? Right? That's like the initial thought. But with that natural opioid that gets released, they're just extremely tired. They just want to sleep. They don't want to really talk to anyone. And they'll literally say like, I don't know, I was just sleeping. They literally slept for an entire like 2 days, which is why we still say like, you can still come in just because it's been, a few days, you can still come in and we can still do this exam. So that's kind of that whole process of you shouldn't judge somebody, whether they're telling the truth or lying about their assault just based off of their affect. Unfortunately, those hormones that are released are most damaging to the memory parts of the brain, which is your hippocampus and your amygdala. And so your amygdala is processing that emotional memory, and the hippocampus is more of that encoding, putting all of those memories in order, right? I woke up this morning and I opened my eyes and then I got out of bed and I walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. It might be like, well, I got up, got a glass of water, and then I opened my eyes, right? Wait, that doesn't make sense. And you can just see them kind of like, that didn't make sense. I can't remember, right? And so if you can imagine after this trauma and this flood of hormones gets released, imagine your brain is like the messiest office that you've ever seen. And all of your memories are written down on little Post-it notes. They're stuck in different file cabinets. And then it's right after an assault and someone says, okay, tell me exactly what happened. And your brain is just trying to run around, collect all of those Post-it notes and put them back in order. And it doesn't work, right? You can't do that. So that's why they say, best recall is 3 full sleep cycles after an assault. It's giving your brain time to process what happened and get everything lined up. Unfortunately, if any alcohol or drugs were used during the assault, that encoding might never come back. Right. So then with rape-induced paralysis, what happens is your body gets an enormous flood of these hormones after a trauma. And it's basically, so rape-induced paralysis, tonic immobility is another term for it. It's an autonomic response. That means it's uncontrollable. And so you go completely paralyzed. I have patients that will say, it was weird. It was like I couldn't move, I couldn't talk, but they can completely see around them. They know what's happening, but they can't move and they can't scream out for help. And so what happens with that is you get a lot of, well, why didn't you fight back? Right? People blaming. Why didn't you fight back? I don't know, because they don't understand why they didn't fight back. There's self-blame. I don't know why I didn't fight back. And then there's the perpetrator. Well, they didn't say no. They didn't tell me to stop. So I thought they wanted it. Right? And so that's where we need to stop just saying, you need to ask for consent, but you also need to check back in to make sure that there's participation. If your partner stops participating and they're just laying there limp, your consent is done, right? It doesn't matter if they said yes before. If they're laying there and they're not participating further in the sexual connection, then consent is off the table and you need to stop right there, right? So, and this is where all of that, again, that secondary victimization that we'll talk about comes in. Why didn't you fight back? Why were you wearing that? You were asking for it. Why would you go out by yourself? What time was it? Right? That secondary victimization is now somebody's come forward saying that they were sexually assaulted, and either law enforcement or just people in general in their daily lives or in society are now blaming them for getting raped, right? So that is a long answer to your question, ultimately. So
it's a crazy circumstance because, first of all, nobody should experience being raped, and then you get raped, and then you have this influx of neurochemicals and this whole disruption of your neurological balance, and then you get questioned by the police and people, and you're trying to explain the situation, but you're just have such an influx of these chemicals where it's hard to explain and figure out what happened, and it's very overwhelming. It's very overwhelming, and then like you said, the secondary victimization gets brought on. So it's kind of thinking about it now. I kind of understand more why people don't always come forward, because even when they try to come forward, they still have this kind of rush of chemicals and they still can't really get their story straight. Not because they're lying, but because they literally can't get it. They can't get it straight. It's not their fault that they can't get it straight. It's just the way our brain works. They were traumatized, so it's almost like our brain, to keep its sanity, it's almost like trying to forget that event, because sometimes things are better forgotten than thought about. And it's you're fighting that at the same time. And it's just a crazy situation to be in.
I think it's the perfect role for a nurse, because police officers don't understand the science breakdown of what's happening. And you explained it really perfectly. It makes so much more sense with everything that's going on. So I think being a nurse advocate for this field is just amazing work. So I hope this field grows in nursing and in the SANE position. And for anybody that's listening out there, how does one become a sexual assault nurse examiner?
Yeah, so there are different programs to take throughout the United States. You can go to the International Association for Forensic Nurses website, and they're also on Instagram. And you can find a program that's near you. I know that the University of Colorado SANE Safe program is free to anyone. It just depends on if you're outside of Colorado, if your work is going to accept that program. So you can always, check with your job first and make sure that they're going to accept that. And then some jobs will actually do their own training and have their own programs if you get hired to the job. So unfortunately, the ones that are, there are some courses that are very expensive. So I wish there was more funding for these, because I think that's what holds a lot of people back, is a lot of these programs are like $1,000. And what if you're going through this program and you decide that you really hate it? That's not a little bit of money, right? So I think just checking with your hospital, seeing what their requirements are, and if they have their own program, or if they will take one of these government-funded programs that, like Colorado, the University of Colorado offers. So with that, it's a 64-hour online didactic, which is nice because you can do it in your own pace. You also get 64 CEUs for it. And then you'd have to go to Colorado Springs, and there's 2 days of clinicals where they actually have these volunteers come in and you practice speculum exams on them. And they are just awesome. I was like doing a speculum exam on one of them, and they're like, my cervix is down and to the left. And I was like, oh, okay. And then it's nice. Like they go through some role playing. Obviously there's going to be so many, different scenarios, right? And it's nerve-wracking at first when you do first start as a SANE, you don't have to know you don't have to know the right things to say all the time. That just kind of comes with each situation and learning. So, but if you're interested in being a SANE, we really, really need more nurses in this field. And it's so important. I wish SANEs were in every hospital. Unfortunately, they're not. If you are interested, just reaching out to the International Association for Forensic Nurses, and they are more than welcome. They're more than happy to help.
And is SANE a specialty in forensic nursing? Is forensic nursing like the umbrella term for all these different little specialties that you could get into?
Yes, exactly. So there's so many different types, right, of forensic nursing, and a SANE is just under that umbrella as just one particular type of forensic nurse. And so typically we will see patients that have been affected by both sexual assault and domestic violence. So when I go to see a patient that wasn't sexually assaulted, but they were physically assaulted by like strangulation, I say, hi, I'm the forensic nurse. Or when I go to see a patient who was sexually assaulted, I'll say, hi, I'm the sexual assault nurse examiner. So they're kind of interchangeable, but there's definitely a ton of different types of nursings under the forensic, in the forensic realm.
And then Leah, where can people find you if they want to get more information or just follow you?
Sure. I'm on Instagram as Off the Clock Nurse. TikTok, I haven't quite figured out I feel really old saying that. But I will post some things on TikTok as Off the Clock Nurse or Off the Clock RN, I think. And then I'm on Twitter as Off the Clock RN. But mainly I post stuff to my Instagram.
All right, cool. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Leah. Have a great day.